Welcome to pottery class. What can I say? To start with, I should go over the tools and whatnot. You can buy a bag of clay at the bookstore, 25 pounds, and you will be given containers of slip, different colors for decorating. I would advise you to get a tool kit if you don't already have tools. They sell these at the bookstore. You can make do, you can get by with stuff you steal from your kitchen, but you really can't beat just buying a tool kit. If you're gonna make pottery for more than a minute, it would behoove you to have all this stuff. $19.95, I believe, somewhere in that neighborhood, about 20 bucks for this, yeah. And they will last you either a lifetime or until you lose them. So I'm just gonna start with the very most basic thing, which is a pinch pot, which I would like everybody to make 4 or 5 of them because they are the perfect way to get a shape, learn how to control the clay, and not have to make a lot of effort into it. So, rule number 1, your clay is constantly drying out, so anytime you take something out of your bag, take a minute and seal the bag back up so the air can't get in there. So with a pinch pot, you simply start with a round ball of clay, and you get old Jack Horner and stick your thumb right in the middle of it and make a little donut hole like that. And then you begin with your thumb and your forefinger, begin pinching very slowly as you turn it around and around. What you're doing is you're making the clay wall thinner, which means it's going to expand. And as you go toward the top, you push in from the outside, down at the bottom, you push out from the inside, and you just simply go around and around, keeping it as even as you can until you get to that ever popular 1/4 of an inch thick. If you want it taller, you sort of force the clay up. If you want it larger, you push on the inside and expand it. You want to make sure that it keeps an interesting shape and not flaring out, unless that's what you're after specifically. So you just simply go around and around. And the longer you work on it, and the more careful you are, the better your finished product will be. So don't be afraid to throw it away and start over again if you wind up with something that looks completely lopsided and stupid. Everything you make doesn't have to wind up in the Museum of Modern Art. You can throw things away. In fact, you should throw things away. Anyway, before you know it, you have a bowl. And you can decorate that any way you want. If you want the top even, you can just take a wire tool, trim off the excess, and it can be either as irregular or as even as you want to spend the time doing. Try to make them fairly regular and even thickness, and do as many as you can before you get incredibly bored doing it. Anyway, there you have a small container that you can do things to later on. When you're done with it, you can take it and just drop it, and that will give you a nice flat bottom for it to sit on. And then you let it dry till where it'll hold its shape. All these little tiny scraps that you get when you get your selection of slips in those containers, I will include one empty container. Put all your scraps in there and then fill it with water Let it sit overnight and you'll have a whole container of slip for joining your parts of your clay together. I should probably qualify the difference between that slip and this slip. This is a slip that's made out of, it's just a slurry made from the clay that you're using. And it's to join pieces together and whatnot. This is a calculated, formulated clay slip that's designed to shrink with the clay and fit a variety of clays so you're not locked into one particular glaze on one particular kind of clay. And then it's got oxides or color, mason stain coloring in it to make it different colors. And I'll go into that later on. Okay, I'm going to show you some basic techniques for joining clay together. I've got a little slab of clay here out of the bag. I've got 2 sticks, one on either side, same thickness. By pulling the wire through the clay and sliding it along the top of the sticks, I get an even thickness all the way to the end on the slab of clay that I'm using. You can just roll the clay out, but this is so much easier. So, if we're going to join 2 pieces of clay together, you can just stick them together, but you're really running the risk of having that shrink and fall apart. So the easiest way, when the clay is still wet, is to lay one slab on top of the other a little bit, about 1/4 of an inch, press them firmly together, and then basically weld the 2 pieces of clay together. I'm just smearing the one piece of clay onto the other. If you can get to it, you need to do both sides. And that will leave you with a little bit of a lump there, which if you have the luxury of it being flat, you can roll out quite nicely. And you'll never know that seam is there. It is what we would call seamless. If you want, you can cut that line at a bevel like that, and that increases the amount of surface area between the 2. If you're going to join it like this, it's probably a good idea to use a little construction slip to make it stick together. This is simply clay from the bag of clay that has been soaked in water until it's soft and gooey and just right. So I'm going to paint just a little bit of that along the edge where it's going to join together. And then I'm going to take these 2 pieces of clay and lay them almost, but not quite, the way they were before they were cut. Just a little bit of an overlap, so there's just enough clay that I can actually weld that seam a little bit. Again, if you have the luxury of doing the other side, anytime that you work that edge, you improve your chances of having it stay together. And that's already the same thickness all the way along. So that's a very easy way to do it. You can also...
Will you hold that up again one more time? I was close up and I didn't
Oh,
get it.
sorry. As you can see, if you want, you can take advantage of the fact that the seam is there and not attempt to hide it. A good thing for that is to use a live edge so there's some interesting detail going on. You can thin that out a little bit first if you need to. Let's get that out of the way for a second.
Oops.
So we're going to get right into construction. Probably the most critical part of any hand-built pot is where pieces are joined together. That's where they're going to crack and break and fall apart and fail you miserably. One thing you have to remember about clay is that as it dries, it shrinks. So if you just stick two pieces together, they will shrink away from each other and you'll have a crack, and a cup with a crack all the way down one side is not going to be very useful. So basically, if you're going to join both ends of a slab you're putting around a cup, the best thing to do is to cut a little bit of a bevel . Like that. And where it wraps around and joins the other piece, you'll need to cut a matching bevel. That just simply gives you a slightly bigger surface to stick together. And where those join, it behooves you to increase that joint's adhesion a little bit by adding some construction slip. This is basically slip that I've made with scraps that have dried out. And you just put them in a container and add some water to it, and you get a slurry that's just perfect for joining these pots together. Put a little bit on both sides. What this does is it improves the amount of moisture that moves back and forth on the joint, so it will stay together during the whole process of drying out. Once they're together, you can just squeeze them. This alone might work, it might not. So the best thing to do at this point is to take, well, probably let's use one of these wooden tools. When you're using the wooden tools, it's always a good idea to just get the end of it wet before you do it so it doesn't stick so badly to the clay. But you're just going to simply weld that edge together. On the outside, and it won't do any harm to do it on the inside as well. Anywhere where you can see the edges of two pieces of clay, it's a good idea to weld them together. And as long as you don't force dry this, if you take your time drying it, that joint should stick together. Shouldn't be a problem. Now you can, if you want, try to not conceal the joint. You can just simply lay one over the other. Even at that, it's a good idea to add a little bit of slip. You can squeeze those together. To guarantee that joint a little bit, you can take, this is just it's a paintbrush that the bristles are falling out of. So I use just the end of it. Well, let's just take a little ball of clay here. A little bit of slip on it. Put that on there like that. Take your modeling tool and just push that together. It gives you a nice little pattern there. You could do a row of those down the edge of the pot, and that would give you a look. You know, I mean, this is all about how things are going to look. You can press it like that, and then stamp it. Anything you can do to force those two pieces of clay together, anything you can do to force those two pieces of clay together will improve the chances of having it survive. So think about your design a little bit before you do it. Anytime you join two pieces of clay, always use slip. The other rule that's easy to remember, same clay, same day. If you're going to join things together, use the clay that came out of the bag at the same time on the same day. Don't pick up a piece you cut out yesterday and think you're going to join it to a piece of clay you rolled out today, because chances are greatly unimproved by that. So just remember, same clay, same day, and you should be all right. Should be being the operative word. So to start with, I'm going to show you how to make a very simple little tray on feet. I like to cook, and I've discovered there's a real shortage of small serving platters for sushi, or a little leaf of lettuce and some wontons on there, something like that. So I like to make a lot of these just to have around the kitchen. So here what you do is you take a piece of clay. I rolled this out about an hour ago and let it sit to dry out a little bit so it's a little bit stiffer. And I've got a pattern marked on there, and I will just cut that out. You can cut it out perfectly square if you want, but I happen to like things that have a little bit of contour to them. So this is going to be the bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to round those edges off so they're not sharp when I'm all done. I'm taking a little bit of the scrap that I have. I'm going to square off strip. Cut myself 4 little squares. Figure out where they're going to go. Always remember, when you're making a flat tray like this, if your feet are right here, this outer edge is going to be very tippy. So give yourself enough room to expand that, and then you're going to join it. So you're going to use slip. When you're joining two big flat surfaces like this, it's always a good idea to take some kind of a tool and rough up the surface just a little tiny bit. A generous supply of slip, don't be shy. And then push it down to create a nice tight fit there. This doesn't have 8 legs or 12, we'd be here all day. So that's a fairly tight fit now, even already. So what I'm going to do is take my sponge, wipe up the extra, and then again I'm going to take my finger and round off those edges a little bit so there's nothing, especially on the feet, if there are sharp edges, then they're going to chip sooner than later, and you'll have a little piece of missing pottery at the bottom of your platter, which is not life-threatening, but it certainly is easily avoided. Remember, this thing's going to be going in and out of the sink, getting washed, being dropped by people at parties, whatnot. Now, before you turn it over, sign the bottom. It's very critical you sign everything. My sign is a stamp that I made, so I'll just simply press that in there right now. Then the piece is signed and you don't have to turn it over while you're working on it. So that will then sit like that. You can leave it flat like that if you want, but to me that's incredibly uninteresting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a minute and bend the edges up just ever so slightly. Push down in the middle a little bit. Now if you're doing something with 4 legs like this, you also want to make sure that all 4 legs are flat so it doesn't wobble when it's done. So you push down where the legs are, pull up on the outer edges. Then take a minute with your sponge and your finger to dress the edges so they're nice and rounded. And because I joined those legs together, I'm going to put this in a damp box and let it dry slowly so that it doesn't shrink too quickly. So take the time to spend a little bit of time going around the edges, making sure they're all nice and Lovely and rounded and smooth and gorgeous. And you've got your first pot. Or second if you made some pinch pots. I'll just set that up on top right now. Handle this very carefully because it's still flexible, even though it's stiffer than it was coming out of the bag. All this clay, you need to save it in a tight ball, wrapped up so it doesn't dry out while you're working on something else. After that's set up to it, there's a stage that I like. The English call it cheese hard, where the piece is drier than it was coming out of the bag, but it's like good Tillamook cheddar cheese. It's soft, but it's firm. At that point you can handle it. At that point it's still a little bit too dry or too wet to add the slip to it, so you let that dry a little bit more. And then like with this one, I painted the slip decoration on there. Blue slip, black slip, yellow slip, just a simple design. It's the same pot exactly, more or less, kind of, sort of.